This week's episode of the Rural Woman Podcast is brought to you by the patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast. This amazing group of individuals contribute financially to the Rural Woman Podcast to ensure the stories of women in agriculture hit your earbuds each and every week. Want to join them in supporting the stories of women in agriculture while getting access to extended episodes, patron-only episodes, and other great perks? Head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more about how you can become a patron through Patreon. Hi, I'm Caitlin Dubin, and this is the Rural Woman Podcast. I'm a first-generation farmer who married into agriculture. Born and raised in a city, I was so unfamiliar with where my food came from, but I was determined to figure it out. Through my journey into agriculture, I saw women who were strong but humble, often taking a back seat. To me, these women were leaders who deserved a seat at the table. I created the Rural Woman Podcast to share the voices of women in an industry whose stories often went untold. The rural entrepreneurs who live and breathe their work, full of grit and pride. We come here to share our stories, to be in community with each other, to be challenged and inspired, but most importantly, to be celebrated and to be heard. We may not all live, farm, ranch, or homestead the same, but we are all connected. We are rural women, and our stories are worthy of being told. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Rural Woman Podcast. Today, you'll meet Lexi Wright. Lexi is a Kansas-based farmer, podcaster, and passionate advocate for purposeful agriculture. Lexi's journey into farming started through her involvement with FFA and eventually led to her becoming the sixth generation to steward her family's land alongside her husband and kids. What began as a hobby farm has evolved into a thriving production operation rooted in sustainability, creativity, and community. Today, we're talking about the growing pains and rewards of making the leap into full-time farming, the power of storytelling in ag marketing, and why building a strong infrastructure is essential for business success. Lexi also shares insights from her own podcast, Farming on Purpose, where she explores deep conversations with changemakers in food and agriculture. From evaluating how we spend our time and money to exploring the future of the local food system, this conversation is packed with practical wisdom and heart. Whether you're farming full-time or have a side hustle into agriculture, or you're just dreaming of wide open spaces, Lexi's story will inspire you to root down, show up, and farm with intention. Without further ado, my friends, let's get to this week's episode with Lexi. Lexi, welcome to the Rural Woman Podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
I am very excited to be sitting across from a fellow podcaster. And as we chatted before I hit record, you have the hard job today of being the podcaster in the hot seat, and I get the privilege of sharing your story. So for the listeners who would like to know more about you or who are unfamiliar with you, tell us who you are, where you're from, and how you got your start in agriculture.
Yeah, my name is Lexi Wright. I live in Kansas. I got my start in agriculture in the National FFA program. Did that in high school, and that was not my first introduction. I grew up on a hobby farm, and my grandparents farmed, but it was really the first thing that I was like, oh my gosh, like I want to do this. I want this to be part of my life for the rest of my life. And so that's where I got my start, and I was in the FFA for, I don't know, like 6 or 7 years throughout high school and college. And then after that, I just knew that we wanted to be farming. My husband and I had always dreamed of it. We talked about it. He grew up on a farm, but there wasn't really opportunity for him to go back at the time. So we had a 20-acre homestead. We did goats, we did chickens, we had horses. We did end up getting cows and renting pasture to make that sustainable, but we wanted more. We wanted to grow. We wanted to be in production agriculture, not just doing it like on the side as much. And so we kept continuing to pursue opportunities and see what was out there. And we're disappointed again and again because getting land is so hard. Everyone, I'm sure, can relate to that. But we did eventually end up moving back to my husband's family farm. His grandma, who is 92, had decided that it was time for her to go to town. And so she sold the property to us. And we're very grateful for the opportunity to get to raise our kids here now and have a little bit of chance to expand.
Very cool. Yeah, 92 sounds like a great time to move to town.
Yes.
I want to go back to your experience with FFA. What fundamental lessons did you learn from being a part of that program?
Well, I think I was drawn to it because I just wanted to acquire the skills that I saw people doing there. And so that was a huge part of it for me. Like, I wanted to know how to weld, I wanted to know how to do like food science judging and livestock judging. So those were the actual concrete, like more technical skills were a big part of what I learned there. And then the leadership side of it as well was a big part for me. I held like local and district and state offices, and forming a community and a network through that was one of the biggest assets to me. Most of the people that I know today are because I met them through the FFA when I was in high school or college. And it just gives you something in common, that you can always fall back on, that similar experience. And so those the technical skills, but also more of the soft skills of the leadership and self-development were a big part too.
Yeah, very cool. And obviously gave you skills that I'm sure you used on your homestead before you moved to the farm. So, and growing up and having a hobby farm and being able to, go out and do all of those chores that you needed to do. Tell us about your current farm now and kind of how it differed from the hobby aspect of farming to being in full production ag.
Well, growing up, the hobby farm, we did have a really big garden and chickens. And then I bullied my parents into letting me get a horse when I was 12. So it was fun. And then I had some bottle calves when I was in high school for part of my FFA project. But it was always more of just like a fun project. What we do now, we are cow calf, and then we have some grain acres as well. And it's still a hobby farm, technically. It's not our full-time income. My husband and I both work off the farm, but we have a lot more opportunity. So we have grown from, I think we started with 20 head of cows to over 60 now, and are looking at more ways to expand. And because we have the land, we have a lot more opportunities to figure out how we do that in a way that works for our family and our setup. So right now, we just moved back to this farm a year and a half ago. And so we're kind of in the evaluation stage of like, what do we change? How do we do this differently than my husband's family has done to this point to make it something that is sustainable for us long term, to maybe one day have that be our full-time thing, and then hopefully to create opportunities for our kids if they should ever want to be involved with the farm, that they have a place to come back to and do that. So we're looking at diversifying into different livestock. It's in an idea stage right now. So other than the grain and the cow calf, we're just like looking at like, well, maybe we want to do feeder calves. Maybe we want to expand our dairy cows because I have milk cows that I milk for our family's consumption. Maybe we want to get goats again. I don't know. We'll see. But just evaluating those different kind of sectors to see how we put it all together to use the resources that we have on the farm in a way that makes sense for us.
I love the phase that you're in and that you are referring it to an evaluation phase. I know for me, and this is coming from an absolute city kid who, as soon as I got out here, I was like, you're allowed to have whatever animals you want. Like, give me all of them. And then realizing how much work goes into livestock and growing a garden or growing a field of crops and all of these things, like then it was the reality check. But the evaluation phase, I think, is the most important when you are in a big venture like yourself. And, your husband obviously grew up on this farm, so he realized like what happens on this farm and what can happen on the farm. But I think thinking outside of the box too is super important, because it would probably be really easy to come back on the farm and be like, well, I'm just going to do what every generation did before me.
Absolutely. And one thing when we bought the farm that we felt pretty strongly about is that this farm has been bought at every generation. So it's been sold from inside the family to inside the family every time that it has changed hands. And we would love to avoid that happening in the future. I don't want my kids to have to buy this farm from me. So we want to have things lined up for our retirement and plans for that so that they don't have to do that and we don't have to rely on that when we're that age, because it sets the kids back. We want them to have the opportunity that we didn't have to get started younger and grow more if that's what they would like to do. So having to buy land right when you get started that you technically already have but you don't, it just makes it that much harder.
I'm curious, and this is just my curiosity of people's terminology for things.
Sure.
You had said that the farm that you are currently on you still refer to as a hobby farm because you don't work on there full time. What to you would institute it being a quote real farm?
Yeah, I'm sensitive to that language too, because I know some people hate the term hobby farm. To me, if it were employing full time, either my husband or I, then I feel like it would be more real. And I don't think that it's not real. Like the work that we do is definitely real. The investment that we make in it is real. It just, to us, to make it more impactful to our finances and to our home, having one of us be able to have a full-time income from the farm would make it real.
Yeah, no, and totally valid. I hear people describe where they live in so many different ways, and I'm always so curious of how people determine for themselves. And I think that's a very valid answer. Like if I am working full-time and there's a full-time income here, I always believe that if you are producing food and it is feeding people outside of your family, you have a farm. And really, like whatever adjective you put in front of it, like that's fine for you. But to me, you have a farm and you are a farmer. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the identity piece of that is important to recognize, that you don't have to exclude yourself from the group just because of the size of your farm or the type of your farm or any of those specifics.
Right. We could make so many size jokes right now, but
Yeah.
we will move on because we are much more sophisticated than that. So talk to me about your off-farm employment and what you are doing and what you are accomplishing for the agriculture industry.
I started freelancing in the marketing space when I was still in college and didn't realize that that had any kind of impact on my future. Just was like, oh, these are fun projects and yay, I make a little extra money. And I worked full time in office job situations until my third child was born. And I was like really feeling the stress of going to an office job every day, having three little kids at home, and figuring that all out, how that worked, and with the responsibilities of then a smaller farm as well. So I decided at that point that I wanted to take my business full time, and I opened a small marketing agency and have been doing that ever since. So it's been almost 6 years that I've been doing this full time. And what we really focus on is helping ag, rural, and farm and ranch businesses to find their market and build the infrastructure in their marketing that they need to be successful long term. It's taken me a long time to realize that that's exactly what we do. You kind of start building websites and doing advertising or social media marketing. And it's like, those are the things that we do. But what we really focus on is providing infrastructure for ag and rural businesses so that they can grow through their marketing versus the very specific services.
Right. And I love that because as a person who has to market my own business, my own company, it can be really easy to fall into whatever trend is happening in marketing and really just kind of throw spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. But if there's not the infrastructure behind it, how successful are you going to be? Because it's not sustainable. You can't learn every TikTok dance in hopes that you go viral and hope that you can sell your eggs on the side of the road that way. Like, it might not work for you. So talk to me about what the process is for you working with somebody in agriculture to build that foundation. Where do you start with them?
Well, I don't do any kind of package deals or cookie cutter approaches because I have found that they just don't work. When I started my business, I tried to do those because it seemed like that's what people wanted and what they were used to. But I would end up completely rewriting the script after we got started. It's like, this doesn't fit you guys at all. This isn't what you need. So we do like some pretty in-depth consultation. I try to get a really good idea of how their business works, what they do, who their customers are, why their customers have chosen them to this point, and how we expand on that. So we're trying to identify the efficiencies that they already have in their business and the things that people are already enjoying about them and just grow those pieces and then eliminate some of the things that are maybe holding them back. So some really in-depth consultation happens first, and then we put together a strategy from there of here's what we're going to do over the next few months, and here's what that could look like if we're still working together a year from now. Here's kind of the roadmap of where we're going to go and the results we would expect to see. And what I love to do there too is we work with businesses of all sizes. I work with small businesses who it's just, one person, a solopreneur, and I work with state agencies and national agencies too. So it looks different, obviously, to scale those separately. But what we look at is here are the things that are sustainable for you in the projects that you're working on. And here are the things that are going to help you to grow to the next stage that you want to get to. When they get to the next stage, it might look completely different because their business has changed so much in that time. But those are some of the early steps that we take and look at.
And I love that you take the approach of doing an in-depth consultation with them to see what exactly they need. Because as you know, if we're speaking of farmers and ranchers, you could be neighbors with somebody and your operation could be the exact polar opposite. And your customers could be the exact polar opposite of the neighbor next to you. So everybody is so unique and individual. But I think that's, kind of the interesting part of marketing for me is just like everybody's so different and your audiences could be completely different and your customers too. What challenges have you seen the most when it comes to your clients that are the solopreneurs or the mom and pop farm and ranch store or anything like that? Like, what are the biggest challenges that these smaller businesses are facing right now?
I think one of the biggest ones that we run into almost every time is a lack of understanding of the resources that they have and that they might need. So a lot of times it's kind of like what you said, you focus on learning those TikTok dances and those quick one-hit strategies to gain some exposure, but they're not really strategies. It's distractions. It's things that you're just like throwing spaghetti at the wall. So when we work with solopreneurs and small businesses like that, we are talking about what resources do you have and what resources can you most affordably get. And a lot of them undervalue the value of their time and overvalue the price of like a piece of software. I see a lot of resistance to invest in software because it's $29 a month or something like that. Well, I don't want that. I don't need that. So they spend a lot of time trying to manipulate the process to make it all done by them, hands-on, which one makes it really difficult to sustain because they have other things that they need to do in their business, like actually make the product or provide the service that they sell. And two, they don't do it as well because they're dreading it most of the time. It's like, oh, how many freaking tasks do I have to do before I can go to bed tonight?
Right.
So I see a lot of lack of understanding of that. And I actually see this with some of the bigger businesses I work with too. They rely too much on software and not enough on the manual processes. So it's like trying to help them understand the opportunity cost or whatever you want to call it and how that makes sense at the level of business that they're at. Another big thing that I see, especially solopreneurs run into, is just that exposure, getting that initial push of people are recognizing my business, people are aware of what I offer, people know how they can purchase from me and know how they can continue to support my business. That is probably the number one thing that people come to me for is, I just want people to know about us. We need to get the word out, is what they say. And so what I like to tell them is, we live in a society that's currency is attention. And if you can't claim the attention for at least a moment, people aren't going to take the extra steps to figure out where you're at, how to buy from you, what you offer, if you can't get that initial attention. So that's usually where we start working together first.
I love that. Like, that is the tweetable moment. Our currency is our attention. And when you're saying that, when I think of it, how do I consume media? How do I consume advertising? Like, think about myself. And if I was my ideal customer, are you yourself your ideal customer, or is somebody else, right? And I think of, small farm and ranch businesses that maybe have an older generation who, they did clip out of the newspaper ad when the meat sale was going to be happening. I haven't looked at a newspaper in I don't even know how long. I don't even get flyers to my P.O. box anymore because I said no thank you, right? Like, how do you take the information that and translate it to maybe a generation who is more resistant? How have you found that to be successful?
It's very challenging, to be quite honest. The most success that I have had with folks of that generation is to get them to understand that I can get them results if they follow my processes. And then most of them are very hands-off. They don't want to know what I do for them on a day-to-day basis or what my staff does for them on a day-to-day basis. They're just like, you know what, you're getting something done here, so keep doing whatever it is that you're doing. Just don't tell me about it because I'm going to cause problems and create wrinkles for that. And that's honestly the most success I've had with that. I hate that that's the case because it's very challenging for us internally as a team to basically do their marketing with no input. But that is the most success. Those old timers, they're very stubborn. They won't give in.
Yeah, they won't get it. But like what you said, when there's results that happen, then that's when there's that buy-in, right? And I totally get it, right? If you are looking at metrics that are completely different than theirs, and you're seeing this success for click rates or, any of those fancy terms that they don't need to know about, they just want to see dollars in their bank account, then I think, yeah, of course they're going to have that buy-in then. You can help support the stories of women in agriculture to be shared through the Rural Woman podcast on Patreon. What is Patreon? It's a membership-based platform that helps fund and support creators like me to create and produce content like this that you all love. New to the Rural Woman podcast Patreon is ad-free listening and patron-only bonus content and exclusive episodes. Learn more and join the patron gang today at patreon.com/The Rural Woman Podcast. In terms of marketing, how important is our stories?
It's probably the most important part. And I hesitate to say that because a lot of times my clients will say, that's not the most important part. The most important part is that it's making sales for me, that it's growing my business. And that's absolutely true because that's the whole point of doing the marketing to begin with. If we can't get it to make the sales, it's not worth it. But the story is incredibly important because it's usually what your marketing is based on, whether you realize it or not. We cannot, in today's day and age, usually market a product simply off of our internal value that we place upon the product. It's possible in very rare instances. Usually, it's the story or the feelings that we create around the product or the service. And I struggle with this point so much because I like to look at things from a very productive perspective of well, if you're not creating real value in the world, what are you doing? Why are you wasting your time? But stories do have value. The stories that we tell ourselves are some of the most influential things that we can do for our lives and the direction that our life takes. And so I have to remind myself of that, honestly, sometimes, because marketing can feel very fluffy. in a lot of ways. But when you think about how much of our lives are based on the stories that we believe, not necessarily fact, not necessarily, proven past results, it's about how we feel about those. That's what makes you realize that stories are some of the most important things that we can do for our marketing. And if you look, I've done quite a bit of research on like media and how journalism works, and it's the same. We just don't always realize that that's what's being presented to us when it includes stats and statistics and facts. It doesn't feel like storytelling as much, but it still is because of the way that it's presented, the tone that is, the undertones, the opinions that are kind of slid in there. And so doing that in our marketing, a lot of people are hesitant to tell their story and the things that they believe. But so often when I can get a business to open up about why they created their business, why they do the things that they do, the way that they do them, that's what opens all the doors to their customers and to getting media attention and all these things. It's like the why you do them is just as important as the what you actually are doing, because people care why you're doing it. People want to see that hope and that intentionality behind what you're doing. They don't want to just see your product or your service and have it be an exchange of goods. They want to make it feel like it's something bigger.
You nailed it. Like that is why our stories matter. And as a podcaster who specifically shares stories, to find people who initially know their value of their story when they sit down here with me is very rare. But my job is to get that story out of you. And hopefully when you listen back, you hear that value just the same as everybody else who's listening right now is hearing that value. Because like you said, that is the piece that connects us, that human connection. That's where the quote money is. For me, anyways, I want to feel that connection. I want to leave a transaction, whether that's listening to a podcast or buying something from my local grocery store or whatever it is. I want to have that connection. And I think in the world that we live in today, where there are great barriers between us, whether, it's political, religious, whatever it is, if you think the sky is purple or the earth is flat, like, I don't really care. But if we can connect through those stories and I can understand you and why you feel the way that you do, I might not agree with you, but we have that connection because we're all human at the end of the day. And when I think of being rural and how isolating that can be, like, I just think that connection is pivotal and building a connection is pivotal. So talk to me about how you have built community and connection through people in agriculture.
Yeah, it's something that I'm still working on because it takes so many layers of community to really build that for yourself in a way that feels like what you're after. But one of the ways that I'm trying to do that is through my podcast. When I first started my podcast, I was postpartum with my youngest child. I think she was about 8 months old. And I was really transitioning in my role on the farm, and I didn't know what that was supposed to look like. I had 4 kids back to back, and that was all that I knew how to do. It's like my job is the babies. I'm in charge of watching the babies and raising the babies. And, I helped out in other places where I could, but that wasn't my purpose right then. So when I knew she was going to be our last and she was 8 months old, it was like, okay, now what? What's next? And so I started turning to find community to see what that could look like. And that ended up resulting in being a podcast for me, to see how other people are creating their lives and their perspectives in their roles on the farm and what was working for them. And so these interviews that I was doing, sometimes they would be about farming, sometimes they would be about motherhood on the farm, and figuring out what people's day-to-day things were and how they were finding success in those. So my podcast is primarily been about trying to create community, not only for myself, but other people who feel similarly, that they don't know exactly what their role is or what their farm should look like, but they're exploring the options.
And that is what community is, right? It's people coming together with ideas and throwing that spaghetti at the wall to see like if this is what it's really going to take. What have been some of the biggest rewards that you have gotten from starting a podcast and building that community?
Some of the biggest are just ideas, being open to hearing other people's perspectives and realizing the breadth of those. Being in, like you said, in a rural community, it can be very isolating because you might only see how things are done in your rural community or in your little neighborhood. And it feels like you might be trying to fit a mold that doesn't work for you. But hearing how other people have made things work for them and the things that they've tried and the things that failed, incredibly eye-opening and so impactful for me just to think about it from their experience. And they share more than just like, well, I did this and it failed, or I did this and it worked. They tell the journey to it too, which is incredibly valuable. Just to think about, on a day-to-day basis, what does that look like if you're pursuing that goal? How does that unfold for your life and how you feel about the life that you're living every day? And would that work for you? Or maybe it wouldn't. Or maybe this other idea that someone else presented would. Or how do you combine them? So that's one of the biggest things that I have gained. The people that I've connected with, I love following their stories too, because it's just amazing to see them unfold. From some of the folks that I had on my podcast when I started about 2 years ago, how different their business is now from when I originally had them on my podcast is just so amazing to see.
I completely agree. We are going into our 6th year doing this, which is wild to me. And to look back at the people that I spoke to 6 years ago to see what they've accomplished, or just see how they have absolutely grown. Some of them aren't even in agriculture anymore. And you know what? They are doing some really incredible things. But I know that the skills and lessons they've learned along the way have molded them into the person that they are today. Because agriculture, all encompassing, is a lifestyle that gives you so many lessons. I'm curious. I personally really don't like it when people ask me this question, but I feel it's my obligation. What are some of like the favorite episodes that you've done?
My favorites are easily the ones where I've gotten a husband and wife to come on together. Hearing their perspectives of the same thing and how different they sometimes are is fascinating. And then seeing how their roles on the farm intersect and work together is just really neat. You kind of almost always hear or see them having discussion, like business discussions on the podcast interview, which is just really cool to see unfold. I've also had a group of sisters that run a business together come on, and I really enjoyed that one too. Just seeing the business, a family business, because that's what they are, from kind of the behind the scenes is really cool, because that's something that I would love to have for ourselves one day, whether that's with kids or whatever that looks like. It's just really, really neat to see how they shape their livelihood and their daily routine around each other.
Yeah, very cool. And I love the husband and wife duo interviews. That almost sounds like it's marital counseling in some way, shape, or form, or could cause marital counseling after, depending how the interview goes.
Yes. Most of them, I think what's really cool to see is that they are very much so in agreement on where they're going,
Right.
The goals. It's just the how they get there that sometimes they like to talk about and figure out what that looks like.
I love that though, because I even look at my own partnership and my own marriage on the farm and how different my husband and I are in so many different ways, but having similar goals. But like you said, just getting there in different ways absolutely sings to me. From your perspective, what are the next biggest opportunities for people in agriculture to expand their businesses?
It's a very good question. I think that a lot of opportunity relies either in cooperatives, and I mean that in the traditional sense of, the local co-op, or in forming cooperatives between neighbors that help amplify the resources that you already have, or take the products that you already have and either diversify them or, remix them in creative new ways. I think that that's one way. I think the other thing that is going to be really impactful as we move into the future of what the food system looks like is going to be local processing and storage. And I'm really excited for that because I think it really makes our food system stronger to have those options available. It's nice to see that USDA is investing in it in some ways with some grants and different opportunities out there. But we've had a big push for local fresh food that gets directly from business to consumer. But what sometimes is missing there is the shelf stability or the ability to prolong the shelf life of a product. And I think as we see some of these local processing options and infrastructure for that built, there's going to be a lot more opportunities available to the people who are doing local food because they're going to be able to create new things without having to go to the big processors and have, those certain levels of quantity that they have to meet to even work with those folks.
In your perspective, the cooperative thing, I absolutely love. And when I see people doing it and doing it well and it's working, I just can't, I look at how agriculture used to be when we read about it in the history books or even in hearing about it from generations before us on farms. Farming used to be more cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
In your perspective, why is it no longer that way? What happened?
I think that we pushed really hard on self-reliance of every farm being its own isolated business that had all of the things that it needed. And because of that, we moved farms to fill a very specific niche that was not actually independent, because when we filled that specific niche, we really only had a handful of customers that were able to buy our product. So moving back to more diversity, but not necessarily more diversity on your farm, but having the infrastructure that is available to multiple farms in an area is what gives us kind of that edge, because the infrastructure behind running a business that is direct to consumer is pretty large, especially if you want to have any kind of scalability to it. And we just kind of sometimes forget about that part. It's like, well, we have the product. Why aren't people going to just buy it? It's like there's so much more behind it that a lot of those bigger companies that we sell our raw ingredients and products to have already figured that out. So if we can work together as local farms and businesses to use an infrastructure that works for multiple of us, we actually increase our independence because we're not reliant on some company that's far away. We're reliant on each other in our local community. And that increases the independence for us as a whole. Instead of just one farmer selling to a large corporation, it's several farmers selling to their neighbors.
Yeah. And that's, when I think of, look at what farmers markets are, right? Like it's one local place that you can bring your goods to sell as a collective in the one area. And obviously for bigger operations or industrial agriculture, for us to sell one person a cleaned bag of grain costs us a lot more money than it would to sell a semi-load to whomever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to figure out ways that you can make both of those viable for your business, I think more people are interested in doing it. It's just finding ways to do it that makes sense for their operation.
Absolutely. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm demonizing big ag or large corporations in any way. I just think for the sustainability of farms and ranches, especially the family farm and ranch, we have to have more options available to us. There has to be more diversity in the market, or we're so reliant on just a few buyers that it really puts us at risk.
Yep, absolutely. And I think diversity is key to agriculture today. We're not just selling one crop or have one stream of revenue, because like you said, if you do, then you put yourself at risk for so many things that are outside of your control. And as farmers, there are already so many things outside of our control. So
yes, unfortunately.
Lexi, what is next for you? What are you looking forward to on the marketing side, as well as the podcast side and the farming side? You have so many sides, so many hats.
I try to embrace that, although sometimes I admit it makes me a little crazy. Marketing wise, I am just really looking forward to 2025. The clients that we work with have big goals for next year, and I'm excited to walk alongside them in those and to meet new business owners that want to work with us and achieve their goals too. I have really invested in the infrastructure of my own business in the last year to allow us to work with more businesses, which has been like a huge step up for me as a person. I never imagined that I would be a business owner or self-employed. Freelancing, I was like, this is fun. Now I'm like, this is a real business and I need to treat it like one. So scaling up there in the last year has been a huge growth factor for me. In my podcast, kind of similar. I'm just looking forward to meeting new farms and ranches and helping share their story with other people who are looking for ideas about how to make their own family farm or ranch sustainable for them and to grow the opportunities that are available to them. Connecting with the people that I interview and the listeners there is so rewarding to me. And then farm-wise, we're looking at expanding, like I said, to just different types of livestock so that we have some diversity there. So we're looking at getting some pens built, and I have been slowly acquiring more dairy cattle to hopefully work towards a micro dairy that'll be selling milk and dairy products. So I'm not sure what that timeline looks like, but I'm excited about it.
Very cool. And so many different unique things for you, and the diversity that you have in your businesses and on your farm. You are walking the talk, Lexi, when it comes to diversity and different things. And like you said, it can be a lot sometimes, but I know for me, when we're doing the things that we feel called to do, it's a lot of work, but there's days that it doesn't feel like work. So
absolutely.
My last question for you is, what is the most rewarding part about being a rural woman for you?
I think the most rewarding part to me is getting to just be outside doing something that I can see the value of with my eyes. We do so much work in a digital world, in today's world, that the value of seeing your work with your hands in the real physical world is just so powerful. And I love that I have that opportunity. And I think it's a blessing because we've seen how hard it can be to get to a place on a farm where you have the ability to do that and have the opportunity to do that if you desire. Not everybody gets that opportunity. And so I'm very thankful for that we have the space and the resources to try things and see them in real life.
Absolutely. And I cannot wait to follow you along and see all of the things that you get to accomplish on your farm and in your business and on your podcast. For the listeners who would like to connect with you after the show, where can they find you online? Tell us the name of your marketing company, your podcast, all of the things.
I actually just went through kind of a big rebrand. I'm trying to finish it up before the end of the year for my marketing business, but it's Back Pocket Social. And then the podcast is Farming on Purpose. And on social media, you can find me at Farming on Purpose or just my name, Lexi Wright. And I'm on most of the channels. TikTok's one of my favorites to hang out on. So that's where I post the most.
Perfect. And I will link all of those in the show notes so people can find you and connect with you. Thank you again so much for sharing your story with me. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Woman Podcast. The Rural Woman Podcast is more than just a podcast. We are a community. A huge thank you to the Rural Woman Podcast team, audio editor Max Hofer. A special thanks to our Patreon executive producers, Sarah Riedner from Happiness by the Acre. To learn how you can become a Patreon executive producer or other ways to financially support the show, head on over to wildrosefarmer.com to learn more. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast to get the latest episodes directly on your playlist. And if you are loving the show, Please be sure to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or any other platform that accepts ratings and reviews. You can connect with us on social media at The Rural Woman Podcast and with me at Wild Rose Farmer. One of the best ways you can support the show is by sharing it. Send this episode to a friend or share on your social media. Let's strengthen and amplify the voices of women in agriculture together. Until next time, my friend, keep sharing your story. Did you know that you can get this same great episode of the Rural Woman Podcast ad-free? I get it. Listening to ads during a podcast isn't always my favorite either. But in order to keep the lights and coffee pot on here at the Rural Woman Podcast Studios, they are necessary. I am so grateful to each and every one of my sponsors, but if you yourself would like to skip the ads while supporting the show, consider joining me over on Patreon. Patrons of the Rural Woman Podcast get ad-free episodes starting at Tier 5 on their podcast player of choice each week, plus some other great benefits. Find out more by heading to the link in today's show notes to learn how you can become a patron through Patreon.